Good evening, guys. It's Wes, and you're listening to Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of the Lord. Alrighty, guys. So it's late on Wednesday night, November 12th, and Trump has officially shut down the shutdown. So I didn't know if I would be filming an episode tonight or this week or whatnot, because I didn't know what the next topic would be that I'd want to discuss. And then I turned on the news, and the president was about to address the country because he was shutting down the shutdown. And I thought, oh, that's a good time to maybe throw together a little late night podcast. And I imagine that if anyone listens to it, probably listen to it in the days that follow, but I thought it was a good time to talk about things as we get into what's next after the shutdown. So I do want to quickly say that I do have a little bit of a cough. I'm under the weather right now. So if I have to pause this thing and restart it a couple of times throughout the episode, I apologize. I hope that it doesn't have a ton of cuts in it. Alrighty, so let's dig right into things. So before we talk about specifics and kind of the takeaways on all of this, let's look at some shutdown facts. So this is the longest shutdown ever. It lasted for about 43 days. And this shutdown was born out of the fact that Democrats wouldn't sign a continuing resolution because of healthcare extensions, specifically the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. There are certain extensions that are set to expire, I believe, sometime in mid-December. I would fact check that and look that up for yourself to be sure about that timeline. But there's extensions that need to be essentially continued by the government. And the Democrats were saying that in order to pass the newest continuing resolution, that they needed guarantees, essentially, that those extensions for the Affordable Care Act were going to be extended, for lack of a better term. Republicans were saying, let's just pass a clean continuing resolution. We don't want to put the extensions in it. We're happy to negotiate those extensions after we pass the continuing resolution. And so that's kind of where the disagreement was. What's kind of notable about this shutdown is usually shutdowns occur because one party or the other can't decide on certain things that they don't want to fund. Historically, that's looked like social programs for Republicans, whether that be increases in welfare or other various initiatives that Democrats tend to like to fund, or Democrats tend to want to shut things down because Republicans want to spend more on defense. That's usually how things are, right? It's a disagreement on increased spending. This was a little bit different in that Democrats weren't signing on to the continuing resolution because they actually wanted to increase spending more, which seems a little counterproductive. That was a Republican talking point. Democrats were saying that they were doing it for the American people. It was a little unclear of what was getting actually through to the American people in terms of messaging, but it's important to note that this was actually a shutdown in order to spend more money for those ACA extensions. So just something that was a little bit different and unique about this one. And then also one final note that this continuing resolution only lasts until January. And so while the government was just shut down for 40 days, we could maybe be back in this position soon in January. So I don't think anybody wants that, but you never know. All right, so what now? Back pay is reported to be happening within a couple of days. Operations are to resume to normal tomorrow. The OMB is directing employees to return to work tomorrow. Air travel may lag a little bit behind. TSA, the FAA, and specifically ATC, or air traffic control, may take a little bit to recover. The airlines notably were one of the largest hits during this shutdown within the past couple of weeks. We saw people really losing out on air travel, which was interesting. And so, not interesting, that's a bad word. It was complicating life for the American people in ways that shutdowns don't usually complicate life for the American people. I'm going to get into a little bit my take on shutdowns in a minute, but I do think that it's interesting to note that that was kind of where people were feeling the pressure. And then I believe that SNAP or food stamps are supposed to follow a similar timeline. Okay, so the country's back in order. What did the president have to say about it? Well, it was a pretty run-of-the-mill speech for the president. I do think it's interesting that, he is giving a speech. It was like 10:30 at night that he went on. Um, we definitely didn't see that with the last president. Now, I don't know that it's crazy to say that a president should be able to address the nation at 10:30 at night, especially for like 20 minutes. In classic Trump fashion, he kind of sat there and he tends to ramble on a little bit. And then it seemed like he wanted to ask reporters if they had any questions, and he was willing to do that. And perhaps maybe, I don't know, Caroline Levitt or someone in the background kind of signaled that it was late and everyone wanted to go to bed and be done and just sign the bill. So he didn't end up taking hardly any questions. I think he got around to answering one. But it was a pretty run-of-the-mill speech. There were two things that were notable in particular. Trump mentioned ending the filibuster, and then he was asked questions at the end about Jeffrey Epstein and some files that have been released today. So we're going to get into those two things quickly. Let's first take a listen to what the president had to say about the filibuster.
I also want to call for a termination to the filibuster so that this can never happen again. If we had the filibuster terminated, this would never happen again. And don't forget, we have another date coming up in the not too distant future. We can never let this happen again. And we should be able to pass really great legislation. So I say terminate the filibuster because, by the way, the Democrats will do it immediately if they ever assumed office, which hopefully they won't.
All right. So despite the fact that, I think it's objectively terrible to end the filibuster, that clip did end kind of funny with him saying when they assume office, which hopefully they won't, it definitely gave the same vibe as another clip, which I'm going to quickly show you here.
There's no point in saying good morning because it certainly is not one.
Alrighty. So there's Nancy Pelosi for you. I thought those two kind of videos had a little bit of the same vibe there. But the real headline, of course, is that Trump wants to, the headline's that the government's reopened, but the headline there out of that speech was that Trump wants to end the filibuster still, despite, the fact that he was able to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. Now, I agree that it does seem like this could just happen again in a couple of months, and nobody wants that to happen. And the filibuster's there, and Democrats can continue to kind of block legislation that they don't like. Now, for the same reason that Republicans wanted to keep the filibuster, and for the same reason that I support the filibuster, I would have to support the Democrats' ability to use it, right? And so you got to be consistent. You can't just be like, I want the government to be open right now, and so we need the filibuster, but you got to be consistent. And so the filibuster does have, good use, and let's get into a little bit quickly about what exactly it does. I guess it's important to note that the filibuster requires 3/5 of the Senate or 60 votes to end debate or cloture in the Senate. You only need a simple majority to actually pass a bill, but this rule in the Senate means that you need cloture to end debate. And in order to get that, you need 60 votes. And so that's essentially kind of the last backstop that Democrats have on this government right now, right? Because the president controls, obviously, the executive branch, and then in the House, you only need a simple majority to pass things. The Speaker holds a lot of the power in terms of what actually gets to the floor and when votes occur. And the Speaker is elected by the majority party. And so Republicans control the House, and they control the executive, and they control the Senate in terms of passing bills, but they're not able to get this cloture without a little bit of Democrat help. And so that's really what the filibuster's there for. And Trump made the point that, Republicans won't be in power forever. Democrats may just get rid of the filibuster when they do take over, but the filibuster is important, and in order to defend it, you have to defend it even when times are easy and when you want legislation passed. And so I get it. I get why he would want that. But if you want lasting legislation and you want not gridlock in Washington, because I don't think people like gridlock, but I do think people like things to not just change immediately overnight. And if you want there to be a stability, let's just say, in Washington, then the filibuster is important. It's a good tool. It's a good thing that exists there. A little history on it quickly. The filibuster used to apply to everything. Democrats got rid of the filibuster for lower level court appointments under the Obama administration. And Mitch McConnell said, you're going to rue the day that, that you did this, because we're going to do it too, to some extent. We're not going to get rid of the filibuster totally, but we like it across the board. And Democrats said, we don't care. We're getting rid of the filibuster. Come Trump's first presidency, that's when you saw the Republicans get rid of the filibuster for Supreme Court nominations, right? And that's why Trump was able to appoint 3 justices to the Supreme Court so easily. And so, like, both parties kind of say, like, don't get rid of it under your power, right? Or under your governing, because we're going to be back in power too, and you're not going to like what's going to happen when we're in power. And so I support the filibuster. I think that this is a bad take by Trump. We know that Trump kind of likes quick fixes. I'll admit that, it can be a little disappointing to have legislation that you want to see get passed and be like, oh, well, that's never going to get passed because of the stupid filibuster. But it also prevents a lot of bad legislation from getting passed. And so I think this is a bad take by Trump. I think that we need to support the filibuster, and I don't want to see in 10, 15, I don't know, maybe even 5 years, when maybe there's people in power that I don't like. Say the Zoran Mamdani types who are running New York City. There is reports right now that he's got an ally in New York, in the New York State Assembly, that wants to primary, I think it's Hakeem Jeffries, so the current Democratic Speaker of that, or Minority Leader, right, who was the Speaker of the House. You've got Hakeem Jeffries, who was Hakeem the Speaker of the House? I gotta look into that. I want to look that up quickly, because now I'm not sure. Hakeem Jeffries, let's see. He's the Minority Leader? Speaker. Hakeem Jeffries is not the Speaker of the House. Blah 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 blah. No, okay. So Hakeem was not the Speaker of the House, but he is the Minority Leader and could, eventually be the Speaker of the House if he's not primaried by progressives in the New York State Assembly who align themselves with Zoran Mamdani's policy. I mean, we could have a very progressive wing of the Democrat Party running things in a couple of years. And then who knows what legislation they get to pass. So I think that this is a bad take by Trump to want to get rid of the filibuster. And I think that we just need to, bear with it, despite the fact that it makes things difficult, despite the fact that, we're only a couple months away from another shutdown, and that Democrats could keep playing this game over and over and over again. And who knows how that will bear in an election. I think it's best to keep this thing intact. All right. So the only other point that I wanted to make quickly about Trump's kind of speech, if you will, I keep calling it a speech, but it really wasn't a speech. It was just kind of a bill signing and address to the news, to the nation, whatever, if you will, the press pool in the Oval Office. But the only other thing I wanted to note was the president was asked at the very end about some Jeffrey Epstein stuff that came out today. I don't know if the kind of question ending very quickly was the president just not wanting to answer those questions late at night. I don't know if he was avoiding the topic altogether. The White House does seem like they're kind of not super happy with this topic anytime it comes up. I don't really want to get into Jeffrey Epstein in this episode because this is about a government shutdown. However, my very quick note that I will make: this issue is not going away for the White House. So, I was never a big Jeffrey Epstein follower in terms of that story. Obviously, I didn't follow Jeffrey Epstein. Obviously, he's, accused of some pretty terrible things. I think that his death was odd. I think that there's a lot of questions about it. I'll be honest, it wasn't a story that I really cared much about. However, I do think that when you talk a lot about a story running for an election and the people that you appoint to your administration talk a lot about a story, talk a lot about an issue, and then everyone takes office and all of a sudden you don't want to talk about the issue anymore, that's a problem. And this story's not going away for the White House. And people are only more interested when questions aren't answered. And so I don't really want to get more into the Jeffrey Epstein story right now because, again, this is about a government shutdown. But I think that that's kind of what I have to say about it. Like, this isn't just going to go away for them. And so at some point, I imagine I will have to talk about the Jeffrey Epstein thing. And the news sources, whatever they are that you listen to, will have to talk about Jeffrey Epstein. And at some point, the president is going to be confronted with this issue because there is probably going to be a vote forced in the House. There's a petition that's needed to override the speaker. And it looks like that's going to get signed here within the coming days. And they're going to have to address this issue. And it doesn't all look good for the president. I don't know how I feel about that. But if he wants to remain in a good standing with his base, he needs to address this because his base does care about this issue. If there's one thing that I do know about this issue, it's that his base cares about it. And you can't just ignore what your base cares about. That's why we see Democrats not doing well right now, because they've got some socialist tendencies. They've got tendencies, to they disliked Joe Biden, right? And then Kamala Harris and the way that they were running campaigns, and Democrats were just saying, like, we don't care about your concerns. This is who we're running. And it doesn't work well. It's why Andrew Cuomo's campaign doesn't work well. And Trump needs to take a lesson from that because he can't just do and say whatever. His base cares about this issue. And yeah, he needs to come up with a game plan here. Fast, too. Okay, too much Epstein, not enough shutdown. So, what's my takeaway on these shutdowns? First, I want to say that usually, in all honesty, I don't really care about them. I'm not opposed to shutdowns. They don't usually affect people. The government shuts down, we go through this whole thing, and then it seems like we reopen and it's like, okay, why did we get so up in arms about all of this? Why did the news cycle focus on this for so long? It just seems like a way to be like, this president broke records with their shutdowns and nobody can agree. And it's like, oh my gosh, do we really care? But this one did seem a little bit different, I guess, in that it was affecting air travel and it was affecting food stamps and other parts of the economy. Workers weren't getting paid. We're still being asked to go to work. I guess I would say a couple of things to that. First, it's always so dramatic, right? So we hear about these massive consequences, delays at airports and whatnot. And I guess my first takeaway is like, if really your biggest issues in life are that you can't catch a flight somewhere, I realize that there's times when that can be very consequential. But at the end of the day, that's not like an end all be all. We live in that's a very first world problem, right? That you can't catch a flight. And so I guess my first takeaway would be like, let's focus on things that are really important. I think we can ask the Lord kind of like, do we really need to like get wrapped around the axle over things again, like flying? Or can we find content in the smaller things in life and then not let that get us all worked up? However, I will say that there are consequences to things like these shutdowns, right? You look at SNAP and food stamps, and there's a lot of interesting kind of things that we can dissect about that on whether or not all of that funding is going to people that really need it, right? Yeah. So, there are consequences. There were also consequences when it came to, these air traffic controllers that were not able to get paid, and then that were maybe going to get laid off, and then flights were decreasing, right? That was going to have massive implications on the airlines. And so there are like things that you need to consider about these. And we can't end up in a scenario where people aren't getting paid and then aren't able to collect unemployment or Social Security or whatever because a continuing resolution isn't passed. So I guess it's kind of like it's two things that you kind of got to juxtapose, right? You got to think about how on one hand, a lot of this stuff really seems unnecessary. I mean, nothing changes for the first couple of weeks. A lot of people do get furloughed that, like, I don't mean to say that their jobs are useless, but government definitely runs inefficiently. And so to some extent, it's kind of like maybe the president will get to lay people off, right? I don't want anybody to lose their jobs. Like, that's not the goal here, that people lose their jobs. But you do want the government to run efficiently. And you want that to be the way that the market, allocates resources best. And so these shutdowns kind of make you wonder, is the government really running efficiently when for the first week and a half of the shutdown, nobody notices anything? But then I guess my other takeaway is that there are real consequences, and we need to consider those when we talk about spending. I guess kind of in the same sense, there is a couple of people that dissented to the continuing resolution, I guess Republicans specifically. You had a couple of Democrats cross the aisle and vote for the resolution, and then you had a couple of Republicans not vote for the continuing resolution. The Democrats that voted for the resolution, and this isn't necessarily to say that this is a bad thing, their constituencies are more moderate, and so they are concerned about elections in the future. And so to that, I would say they were voting for it because they felt their constituents wanted the government to be open. The Republicans that didn't vote for it, kind of an interesting stance that they take here, specifically Rand Paul in the Senate and then Thomas Massie in the House. They don't vote for it because they're fundamentally opposed to the spending that we do have, right? They're saying we do spend too much. These spending bills need to be smaller. This is why you typically see people shut down the government, as I said a little bit earlier in the podcast. And so I think they have very interesting opinions. And well, I'm not sure if I were in their position, if I would shut the government down because of spending. I don't know. Maybe I would, because I think that it's just an interesting position that they take, that they're willing to go out on a limb and say, we are spending too much money and we got to get to the bottom of this. And we're not going to fix this by passing continuing resolutions and by passing spending bills, high spending bills, and by passing, increasing the debt ceiling over and over and over again. Because really, those are all the steps that it takes for these budgets to get passed. It's crazy. They raise the debt ceiling every now and then. That doesn't happen to have to happen nearly as often. But then they pass these large budgets. You saw that with the big, beautiful bill, right? There was a lot of spending in that bill. And maybe it accomplished some good things, but like, you can't just spend money forever and ever and ever. I don't think that's fiscally responsible. I think as Christians, I would say you need to be fiscally responsible. That's a hard thing to do, but the government definitely doesn't do it well. And so I applaud these senators who are willing to step up and say, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to this. And then there was one other Senate or House representative by the name of Greg Steube that kind of dropped out late on this resolution. And he took kind of issue with kind of something a little more niche. There was something called Arctic frost, which was, I believe it was the thing that was involved. It might be a little bit different, but it was in something that had to do with GOP senators, their records being subpoenaed and kind of looked into. And so this allows them to sue the federal government, I think, for up to $500,000. Representative Steube is taking issue with this and saying, I am not comfortable with these senators basically having so much deference to sue. And I don't know. I think that's interesting, too, because while I don't think that it's maybe, or in other words, I think those senators need to have their rights protected. It's all spending, right? It's all money that you're taking from the federal government. And that's not fiscally responsible. And it's not why you serve in the Senate and do public works, right? To make all this money off of the American people. And so, I don't know. I guess my takeaway is that really think about whether or not all of this spending is necessary, because your life does go on largely when these shutdowns happen. And while there are consequences, definitely there's consequences. to the actions of shutting the government down, there's also going to be consequences to spending like this. And whether or not we see those now or down the road, we have to consider this when we're passing budgets or debt ceiling raises or continuing resolutions. And so that would be my encouragement in light of all of this. Okay, so I'm not sure how interested people are going to be in this final point here. I obviously follow politics a lot closer than the average Joe, and so it interests me a lot. But my final point here is that Democratic leadership is definitely in trouble in terms of this shutdown and how it wrapped up, and whether or not the American people really think that it was worth it. I mean, I'm not really sure that Democrats did get much of anything out of it. They may try and say that they did. I don't really know. I mean, Mike Johnson always said that he was willing to negotiate the ACA extensions. And so I'm not really sure if they can show much, because he's saying reportedly now that he wants to negotiate the ACA extensions, just like he always said he was willing to do. And so Chuck Schumer definitely has an interesting political kind of career decision here, whether or not he's going to remain the minority leader in the Senate, and then Hakeem Jeffries is the minority leader in the House. They're both kind of in the hot seat right now. And so in these coming days, I think it will be interesting to see whether or not there's much of a push within the Democratic Party to remove these two guys. Again, we've seen a big voting bloc in New York City. I know it's very liberal, but we don't know if the rest of the country is kind of going to follow suit with the Zorn Mamdani movement, right? Mamdani movement, and AOC and Bernie Sanders, right, are also really big political figures. Could you see the likes of Sanders in the Senate and Ocasio-Cortez in the House kind of rise to leadership? I'm not saying that I think that that would be good for the country. I'm not even sure. I'm not a Democrat strategist. I think I've said that on this show before. I don't know what I'd tell them to do, though, strategy-wise, because, I mean, that might be a good move, kind of try and breathe some life into the party. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. So stay tuned. Definitely stay tuned. And if those two do rise to the top of their party, pay attention, because that's big news for the American people. If we have socialist, tendencies and self-proclaimed socialists, people pushing socialist policies, that's something that you need to pay attention to. All right. So we've talked about the shutdown. That's kind of my thoughts there. I really don't have much else to say about it right now. I hope that things can get back into operation as quickly as possible and that people can get specifically paid. And if they do need food stamps, can get those as quickly as they can. But yeah, I think I've shared kind of how I feel about it. It's important, but, probably a little bit overblown to some extent. There were a couple of videos that I wanted to react to quickly. These are kind of the moments where it would be nice to have an audio component, or I'm sorry, a video component to the podcast where I could show you kind of what I'm viewing on either Instagram or in other podcasts, things that I react to. But I mean, alas, I don't have that opportunity. So I'm going to drop in a couple of sound bites. There's two or three in particular that I want to go over. The first one is in regard to a TPUSA event that happened either a week ago or so at, I think it was University of California, Berkeley campus. And so that's a notoriously liberal college. TPUSA went. I think it was the final stop to their tour that Charlie Kirk was supposed to be a part of. And I don't know. I felt like this video was important to share because it really does show kind of the state that our country's in. And I realized that both sides of the aisle probably have people that either feel this way or are willing to wish ill on one side or the other, but it does no one any good to sit under a rock. And there is no denying that it's just repulsive, the video that I'm about to drop in. There were countless videos of protests at this TPUSA event that I could upload, but this one in particular really stood out to me because it really just was vulgar and terrible. I will say that viewer discretion is advised for this video, or listener discretion, I guess, in this case, is advised. I'm not able to, I don't, I don't find it necessary to go through the work to bleep out a lot of what's in this podcast. I don't use this language myself on this show, but this is what these people said. And so my current stance on this is you need to listen to what these people were saying. And I'm not going to go through and bleep out every F word that they used because they were chanting the F word about Charlie Kirk. The exact line over and over again that you'll hear is F your dead homie. And so just take a listen. All right, so that's our culture, guys. That's the society that we live in. As Christians, I mean, I think that there's a couple of reactions to that. I guess on my political reaction would be, you hear stuff like that and you think, all right, so the left-leaning media, just Jan 6, right? Insurrection. Which, side note on the insurrection thing, I'm getting a little sidetracked here, but side note on the insurrection thing. Insurrection is not just like a word that everybody uses in their daily vocabulary. Like, hey, what did you go out and do today? I don't know. I ran into some insurrectionists. So when people talk about insurrectionists on January 6th, I'm not saying that what happened there wasn't wrong. It was bad. It was a riot on the Capitol building steps and they stormed the Capitol building. Of course, that's terrible. I guess my point in bringing up the insurrection thing is like, don't be so quick to jump to like insurrection or Trump's a co-conspirator in the New York hush money case, right? Co-conspiracy, insurrection, these are like kind of complicated legal terms. And you got to meet a lot of prongs in order to reach that level. And so, I don't know. I guess just when I hear that kind of coverage on the news, I'm always like, I roll my eyes a little bit because I'm like, everything's just so terrible. When there's a MAGA movement that does something, it's like, oh my gosh, they're insurrectionists. How crazy are they? And it's like, do you use that word daily? Do you know what that means? I don't know. But it was a riot that occurred on January 6th, just like this is a riot that's occurring at the Charlie Kirk, this Charlie Kirk event, I guess Turning Point event, but you get my point. And so on a political level, I just think to myself, it's silly because riots are always bad and we should never accept them, right? We should always say that what's happening is wrong, particularly when the people are chanting F your dead homie. Like, that's horrible. That's a horrible thing to say. And so the media should be all over that. And they should be out here saying, just like January 6th was wrong for the riots that occurred there, this is wrong too, because these college students, though I'm sure misguided, are, I mean, they're saying a terrible thing about somebody's life, right? Charlie Kirk had a wife and children. We talked about that on the last episode. Those children have to grow up without their father. Erica Kirk has to move through life without her husband. And so this is just politically a terrible thing. I guess as a Christian, my reaction would be, I mean, it's tough to forgive these people, right? Because that's what we're called to do. So, I mean, that's what we're called to do. We're called to forgive these people. That's a tough thing to do, but we got to learn how to do it. We also got to learn how to engage with these people, right? We got to learn how to talk to them and say, this is not fulfilling, right, for your life. Wishing death on people and that kind of rhetoric contributing to society in that way, that's not building up anything worth value. If that's what our society boils down to, then we live in a pretty bad society. But it's not what our society boils down to. And so we gotta fight for what's right as Christians. And we gotta really push back against stuff like that because it does no one any good. I mean, that is about as destructive to society as you can get, right? People cheering for somebody else's death is about as destructive as it gets for a society, because Charlie Kirk was all about talking things through. Charlie Kirk clip came across my social media feed today that I actually didn't agree with. I was like, I don't really know that I agree with that take. And I felt like he was being really rude to the college student that got up and was talking to to the issue that he felt was important. But that doesn't mean that, like, first of all, that doesn't mean I fundamentally disagree with a lot of what Charlie Kirk said. But more importantly, I mean, that doesn't mean that what these students are saying isn't like horrible and terrible and wrong. And so I just wanted to drop that clip in there because I felt like it was important for, if you're listening to this show, for you to hear really what the left is saying about this man's life. And yeah, to know that that's what you're fighting up against and that's what you're standing against. Speaking of things that are unfulfilling, I came across this clip on social media the other day, Instagram in particular. It was posted by the New York City Gay Men's Choir, and they're singing a song about voting. I'm going to drop that clip in there now, and then we're going to analyze it. It's interesting. And so I'll preface with that. It's definitely another, I guess, aspect of the progressive movement in our country. I'm not exactly sure when it was filmed. I should look at that. But yeah, it's quite interesting. So take a listen. Okay, so I get a lot of crazy videos across my feed because that's just what my feed is, especially on my Instagram account for this show, which I guess I could plug right now. Go follow this show on Instagram. But especially for this show, I get a lot of interesting videos because my algorithm knows that I like to react to them on my show, I guess. And so you're probably thinking, why did I upload that one? Because it's a little odd, right? These men, I mean, I guess they sound okay, but they're singing, we're going to vote, 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 right? For our moment, I think. And it continues to go on and on. And it even gets more dramatic at the end, right? Where like the background music cuts out and they like, it's like, like this final build up. And I don't know. I heard that and I thought to myself, on one hand, our country's definitely like going in a crazy direction if this is what we're posting on social media, and like the people in the comments love it too. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what liberalism is. But also, like, I listen to it and I'm like, this is not, like, I don't know. I feel bad for these people because, like, that's not what life is about. First of all, the Gay Men's Choir, right? I mean, as a Christian, you think that homosexuality is wrong, right? I would say that that's a tenet of Christianity. And so, I don't know. So there's that aspect to it. But then also just like, that's what you find your fulfillment in, voting. And not even voting for anyone in particular. It's just, we're going to vote, vote, vote. This is our moment. And I just think to myself, I'm like, man, I do not have it all figured out, but I find my hope in Jesus at the end of the day. I mean, that's the only thing you can find your hope in, right? And so you look to him as your hope, and you just feel bad for people that find their hope in voting because it's not going to fulfill you. You may be able to trick yourself for most of your life that it is, but I don't know. It's not fulfilling. And so I dropped that clip in there because I thought, first of all, maybe you'd be interested to hear what the left is singing about now, because they do like to sing about a lot of different things. There were some songs at the No Kings protest that were kind of funny. And so the left does like to sing, which, that's not a bad thing, I guess. But Yeah, I don't know. I just thought you'd be interested to hear that. And then my takeaway is simply that look for your fulfillment in something other than politics, because you can listen to my show on the Shutdown, or you can listen to, I don't know, whatever else you want to listen to. My show on Charlie Kirk or whatever. I had some shows at the beginning of January you could go back and listen to. You can sit on Instagram and scroll about, whatever, and listen to videos that the left is putting out, or that the right's putting out for that matter. But you cannot find your fulfillment like this choir did in voting, because it's just so unfulfilling, and that's no way to live your life. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I want to leave you with in this episode. I know the episode was about the shutdown, but I wanted to react to a couple of quick videos and just say why I think that it's important to kind of know where the other side's standing, to know what you're up against, and then the hope that you as a Christian have to offer both the right and the left, and why that can be so potent, right? In a world that's clearly looking for hope. I mean, that video is so evident of that, right? I would think that not only do they find camaraderie in their choir, which, yeah, but like, there's just so much more out there. And go to church. If I guess that's my final point. If you're looking for something and you're looking for like singing, like I would just say like worship is the perfect opportunity to do that. And though the church may not agree with your lifestyle, they have something better to offer than anything that you can ever hope for. And so, yeah, go to church, because I know it's a struggle to find a good church, and sometimes it's hard to motivate yourself to go. But if that's what you're turning to, I think you'll probably hear a message at church that you can be more encouraged by. Well, guys, that kind of concludes the end of the show today. If you've listened this long, thanks for staying with me. I guess one programming note that I wanted to make before we wrap up is that I am considering starting kind of like a morning headlines type show. And so it would be very short. I would hope to keep it to about 10 minutes. I would go over a couple of the major headlines for the day. Hopefully it would come out pretty early in the morning, which is something that, I still haven't decided exactly on, or the format by which how I'd do that. But I'm thinking that I'd just post it right under this show on all of the same platforms that I post the show to. I guess specifically Spotify is to my Spotify feed is where I would post it. And so if you're interested, it would just be a quick way to get your morning headlines. You could even listen to it throughout the day, because the news really doesn't change that much. And if you're maybe not interested in the longer show, or if I don't even have as much content for the longer show, I think that this could be a good way to go about just reporting some basic news. And so, yeah, so I guess stay tuned and look out for that. You may see that within the next couple of days. I already have kind of some of the marketing's a bad word, but some of the imaging done for it. And so, yeah, I guess stay tuned. Well, that's all I have for today. So go in peace and God bless. Have a great day, guys.